I need you to understand something before I say any of this. I am not a storyteller. I am not someone who makes things up for attention. What I am about to tell you happened. Every word of it. And the reason I am telling you now is because I do not think I have much time left before it finds me again. It started on a Thursday night, deep in a stretch of forest that most maps do not even bother to name. There were 5 of us, trained, sent in with a simple directive: investigate, confirm. We had been walking for about 3 hours when the first sound came. It was not a howl. It was not a growl. It was something between a whisper and a crack, like a voice being broken in half and scattered through the trees. It came from the left, then the right, then directly above us. Jensen stopped first. He held his fist up and the rest of us froze. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The sound came again, closer this time. It moved through the canopy like something dragging itself across the branches, but there was no weight to it. No snapping, no rustling, just the sound of motion without a body. I remember looking at Reeves. His face told me everything I needed to know. He had been in combat zones. He had seen things that would make most people collapse. And in that moment, his hands were shaking. Then it happened. A voice came from the darkness about 40 meters to our east. And it said in perfect clarity, "Jensen, hold position." The exact words our team leader had said 5 minutes earlier. The exact tone, the exact cadence, like someone had recorded him and played it back through the trees. Jensen turned to me. His eyes were wide. He mouthed one word. But we did not run. Not yet. Because that is when we heard the second voice. This time it came from the south, and it was mine, saying words I'd whispered to Reeves just moments before we entered the tree line. It knew what we sounded like before we ever spoke to it. That sentence does not make sense. I know that. But I need you to sit with it for a moment, because everything that happened after that night only gets worse. We were told we were hunting werewolves. That was the briefing. That was the mission. A remote stretch of old-growth forest with a history of disappearances, strange sightings, and mutilated remains found at the edges of the tree line. Locals had been reporting encounters for years. Large creatures, canine features. The department classified it as a lycanthropic threat. Standard protocol, 5-man team, silver-loaded ammunition, night operation, 72-hour window. What they did not tell us, what nobody could have told us, is that the werewolves were not the problem. They never were. Something else lived in those woods. Something that had been there long before the wolves, long before the disappearances, long before anyone thought to send people like us in to investigate. And by the time we figured that out, it had already started hunting us. Let me take you back to the beginning. 3 weeks before that night, I was sitting in a briefing room with fluorescent lights and stale coffee, reading a file that should have made me laugh. Werewolf activity, confirmed sightings, recommended armed response. I had been doing this work for 6 years. I had seen things that would make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. But werewolves in a forest that nobody had heard of, in a region with no major settlements, no strategic value, no reason for anything unusual to be there at all. It felt routine. It felt like a waste of time. The file listed 14 disappearances over the past 18 months. 2 wildlife researchers. A family of 4 that drove into the area and never drove out. Local police had investigated the first few cases. Then they stopped going in altogether. The interviews with residents from the nearest town, a place so small it barely qualified as a village, were the most unsettling part of the file. Every single person said the same thing in different words. Do not go into those woods. Not at night. Not during the day. Not ever. One old woman, a farmer who had lived on the edge of the forest for 40 years, told investigators that the forest had changed. She said it used to be normal, quiet. Just trees and animals and the sound of wind. But something moved in, she said. Something settled. And after that, the animals left first. Then the silence came. And then the screaming started. Nobody followed up on that interview. It was marked as folklore and filed away. Our team assembled on a Monday. Jensen was Lee, former military, calm under pressure. The kind of man who never raised his voice because he never needed to. Reeves was our tracker. He could read the ground like other people read books. Carter handled communications and tech. Davis was our marksman, and I was the analyst. My job was to observe, document, and make sense of whatever we found. We flew into a small airstrip about 60 kilometers from the forest edge and drove the rest of the way in 2 vehicles. The road turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt to nothing. The last 10 kilometers were on foot. I remember the moment we crossed into the tree line. It was late afternoon. The sun was still up, but the temperature dropped the second we stepped under the canopy. Not gradually, immediately, like walking through a door into a different room. Reeves noticed it too. He stopped and looked up at the branches above us. The trees were enormous, old growth, trunks wider than cars, canopy so thick that the sky disappeared behind a ceiling of dark green and black. But it was not the size of the trees that bothered him. It was the silence. No bird, no insects, no wind moving through the leaves. Nothing. A forest that sighs should be alive with sound. It should hum. It should click and chirp and rustle. This one did nothing. It just stood there, massive and still, like it was waiting. Davis made a joke about it. Something about the animals being smart enough to leave. Nobody laughed. We set up a base camp about 4 kilometers in. Standard perimeter. Motion sensors. Infrared cameras. Radio check every 30 minutes. Jensen gave us the rundown. 2 night patrols. Rotating shift. Document everything. Weapons hot at all times. At that point, I still believed we were looking for werewolves. I still believed that was the worst thing these woods could hold. I want you to remember that, because what we found on the first night changed everything, and it had nothing to do with werewolves. We found it at 0300 on the first night. Reeves spotted the trail, or rather he spotted the drag marks. Something heavy had been pulled through the underbrush, carving a path through the moss and soil about half a meter wide. The marks were deep and consistent, like whatever had been dragged was not struggling. It was already dead. We followed the trail for about 200 meters before the smell hit us. I have been around death before. I know what a body smells like after a day, after a week. This was different. It was metallic and sharp, like copper mixed with something chemical, something that should not exist in the middle of a forest. When we reached the clearing, Jensen held us back and swept the area with his rifle light. And that is when we saw it. It was a werewolf, or what used to be one. The body was massive, easily 2.5 meters long, even crumpled the way it was. Thick gray fur matted with dark fluid, claws the length of my hand, a jaw that could snap bone like kindling. This was a predator, a real one. The kind of thing that sits at the top of the food chain and has no natural enemies. And something had taken it apart, but not the way a predator would. Not the way anything I had ever seen would. The bones were not broken outward. They were crushed inward, compressed, like something had applied force from every direction at once, collapsing the rib cage into itself. The skull was intact, but the jaw had been separated cleanly, not torn, separated, as if it had been carefully removed and set aside. Sections of flesh were missing, not ripped away, removed, in precise rectangular strips. Skin, muscle, and tissue taken in clean lines that no claw or tooth could produce. There was almost no blood on the ground. Whatever had done this had either drained the body or killed it somewhere else and moved it here. Carter knelt beside the remains and pointed at something I will never forget. Along the exposed spine there were marks, small, evenly spaced indentations pressed into the bone. Not scratches, not bite, pressure marks. Like something had gripped the spine and held it in place while it worked. Davis said what all of us were thinking. This was not a kill. This was a dissection. Jensen circled the clearing twice, checking for tracks. He found none. No paw prints, no footprints, no indication that anything had walked to or from the body. Whatever left this here either flew, climbed, or moved in a way that did not leave traces on the ground. I documented everything. Notes on the wound patterns and the condition of the remains. My hands were steady because my training kept them steady, but my mind was not, because here is what did not make sense. We were sent to investigate werewolf attacks on humans. That was the threat. Werewolves killing people. But this werewolf, this apex predator built for violence, had been killed by something else. Something that did not just overpower it but studied it, took it apart with a precision that suggested intelligence. Curiosity. Reeves looked at me across the clearing, and I could see the question in his eyes. The same question forming in my own mind. If something in this forest could do this to a werewolf, what could it do to us? We reported the find back to base camp over encrypted radio. The response was a single line: continue mission. Document and proceed. So we did. I should have refused. I should have told Jensen we needed to pull out immediately. But I did not, because at that point I still thought we could handle whatever this was. The second night is when the fear became real. We left base camp at 2100, moved northeast, following a ridge line that Reeves had identified as a likely travel corridor for large predators. The plan was simple: cover ground, set trail cameras, look for signs of activity. For the first hour, everything was quiet. The same dead silence we had noticed from the beginning. No wind, no animals, just the sound of our own boots on the forest floor and the occasional crack of a dry branch underfoot. Then the footsteps started. They came from behind us, heavy and deliberate, matching our pace exactly. When we walked, they walked. When we stopped, they stopped. Not a half second later. Instantly, like whatever was following us could anticipate the exact moment we would halt. Jensen signaled for us to hold position. We crouched low and listened. 30 seconds of silence. Then a minute. Nothing. He gave the signal to move again. We took 3 steps. The footsteps resumed. I turned and swept my light across the trail behind us. Trees. Nothing. But the sound had been close. 20 meters at most. Whatever was making it should have been visible. Carter pulled out his handheld scanner. Military grade. Capable of detecting heat signatures through moderate cover up to 200 meters. He swept the area behind us in a wide arc. Nothing. No heat signature. No movement. No living thing registered on the display. But we could hear it. 5 trained operatives standing in complete silence, listening to something walk toward us that did not appear on any instrument we carried. Jensen made the call to push forward. We increased pace and moved along the ridgeline for another 40 minutes. The footsteps followed the entire time. Never closer. Never farther. Matching us step for step like a shadow with weight. Then the equipment started failing. Carter's radio crackled and went to static. He switched frequencies. Static on every channel. He checked the hardware. Fully functional. Batteries full. Antenna intact. But every frequency was flooded with a low, pulsing hum that sounded almost organic. Like a heartbeat played through broken speakers. The infrared scanner flickered twice and shut off. When Carter rebooted it, the display showed a single heat signature directly ahead of us. Tall. Stationary. We stopped. Jensen raised his rifle and sighted down the path. I was right behind him, watching over his shoulder. The trail ahead curved slightly to the left, and just beyond the bend, between 2 enormous oak trunks, there was a shape. It was tall. Taller than any person. Taller than any werewolf profile in our files. It stood perfectly still, partially obscured by the trees. I could not make out details, only the outline. A shape that was too narrow to be an animal, and too tall to be human. Long limbs. A head that seemed slightly too large. And a posture that was not standing, not crouching, but something in between. Like it was folded. Compressed. Waiting. Davis raised his rifle beside Jensen. Both of them had the shape in their sights. Then it was gone. Not moved. Not retreated. Between one heartbeat and the next, the space between the trees was empty. No sound of departure. No rustling. No footsteps. Just absence where a moment before there had been presence. Reeves checked the ground where it had stood. There were no tracks. No impressions. No broken twigs or displaced soil. The forest floor was untouched, as if nothing had ever been there. But something had been there. All 5 of us saw it. All 5 of us felt it. Carter's radio came back to life on its own 30 seconds later. Clear signal. No static. No hum. Like nothing had ever been wrong. We returned to base camp without speaking. Nobody said a word the entire walk back. Not because we were disciplined. Because none of us knew what to say. I sat in my tent that night reviewing my notes and trying to make sense of what we had encountered. A creature that left no tracks. Produced no heat signature. Could match our pace perfectly. Could disable our equipment. And could vanish from plain sight without making a sound. This was not a werewolf. This was not any documented creature in any file I had ever read. This was something else entirely. and it knew exactly where we were. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I spread every document from the mission file across the floor of my tent and started over from the beginning. 14 disappearances. I had read the summaries before we deployed, but I had not studied them. Not really. I had skimmed them the way you skim something you think you already understand. Werewolf attacks. Case closed. But now, with the image of that dissected carcass burned into my memory and the sound of phantom footsteps still ringing in my ears, I read every page again. Slowly, carefully, and what I found made my stomach drop. The first disappearance was a hunter named Thomas Vale, experienced outdoorsman. Went into the forest in November and never came back. Search teams found his campsite intact, tent still standing, food still packed, rifle propped against a tree, fully loaded, safety off. No signs of struggle, no blood, no tracks. He was simply gone. The second was a wildlife researcher named Anna Harlow. She had been documenting migration patterns in the region. Her last radio transmission was logged at 14:32. She reported hearing unusual sounds, clicking, rhythmic, coming from above. After that silence, her body was never found. I went through each case one by one. The family of 4 who drove in and never drove out. Their car was found on a forest road with the engine still running and all 4 doors open. Personal belongings on the seats. A child stuffed animal on the dashboard. No people. No bodies. No explanation. Every case had the same signature. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds on the rare occasions when remains were recovered. No tracks from an attacker. And in the few cases where partial remains were found, the same pattern appeared. Precise removal of tissue. Bones crushed inward. Internal organs either missing entirely or rearranged in ways that made no anatomical sense. These were not attacks. They were examinations. I pulled up the werewolf sighting reports and cross-referenced them with the disappearance dates. The werewolf sightings were real. Multiple independent witnesses over a 2-year period, all describing the same thing. Large bipedal creatures with canine features moving through the forest at night. But here is what no one had noticed until I laid it all out on paper. Every werewolf sighting occurred within 72 hours before a human disappearance, not after. The werewolves were not hunting humans. They were fleeing, moving through the forest in visible panicked patterns, and humans who happened to be in the area at the same time disappeared shortly after. Something was driving the werewolves out of their territory, and whatever it was picking off humans along the way. Not randomly, not opportunistically, systematically. I mapped the locations. Every disappearance formed a rough circle around a central point deep in the forest. The closer to the center, the more recent the disappearance. Whatever was doing this was expanding outward, testing wider and wider ranges, like an animal learning the boundaries of a new hunting ground. Except this was not an animal. Animals do not remove tissue in rectangular sections. Animals do not crush bones inward with uniform pressure. Animals do not rearrange organs. Animals do not make people vanish without leaving a single mark on the ground. This was intelligence. Cold, patient, methodical intelligence. I brought my findings to Jensen at dawn. I showed him the maps, the timelines, the wound patterns. I told him what I believe, that the werewolf activity was a symptom, not the cause. That something else was operating in this forest. Something that hunted predators and studied prey. Something that had been watching the area, learning it and expanding its reach with each passing month. Jensen listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stared at the map for a long time. Then he looked at me and asked a question I was not ready for. He asked, if it has been studying this area for 18 months, how long do you think it has known we are here? I did not have an answer, but I felt one settle into my chest like cold water. It had known since we arrived, maybe before. And everything we had experienced, the sounds, the footsteps, the sighting, the equipment failures, none of it was accidental. It was observation. I need to stop for a moment and make sure you understand the full weight of what I am about to say. We were a 5-person tactical team with military-grade equipment and years of experience dealing with things that most people believe only exist in stories. We had silver ammunition. We had infrared scanners. We had encrypted communications and extraction protocols and enough firepower to put down a pack of werewolves without breaking formation. None of that mattered. Not one piece of it. Because we had prepared for the wrong enemy. The werewolves were real. I want to be clear about that. They existed in that forest. We had physical evidence. We had the carcass. We had years of documented sightings from credible witnesses. They were there, but they were not at the top. On the morning of our third day, Reeves found a second carcass, then a third, both werewolves, both displaying the same wound patterns as the first. Crushed bones, precision tissue removal, no blood, no tracks. The third body was the worst. It had been positioned, not dumped, not dragged and left, positioned, seated upright against a tree with its limbs arranged in a way that almost looked natural, as if something had tried to replicate how a living creature would sit but did not quite understand the mechanics of it. That image still haunts me. A dead werewolf posed like a doll against a tree trunk in the middle of a silent forest. Something had killed it, taken what it wanted, and then arranged the remains. Not to hide them, not to display them, to study the arrangement, to see what it looked like. Jensen called a team meeting at base camp. He laid out the situation in plain terms. We were not dealing with a werewolf threat. We were dealing with an unknown entity that was actively hunting werewolves, studying both predators and humans, and demonstrating a level of intelligence that exceeded anything in our operational files. Carter asked the question we were all thinking. What is it? Nobody answered. I had been turning this over in my mind since the previous night. Whatever this creature was, it defied every classification I knew. It was not a predator in the traditional sense. Predators kill to eat. They kill to survive. They do not dissect. They do not arrange. They do not remove tissue in geometric patterns or crush bones with mechanical precision. This thing was not hunting for food. It was hunting for information. And the more I thought about it, the more terrifying the implications became. If it had been in this forest for years, studying the local wildlife, studying the werewolves, studying the humans who wandered in, then it was building something. A body of knowledge, an understanding of the living things around it. The question was why? What does a being of that intelligence want with that information? What is it learning toward? What is the end point of studying how every creature in an ecosystem functions, survives, and dies? I did not have an answer then. I have one now, but I will get to that. Jensen made the decision to extend the mission. Headquarters agreed. The original objective, confirm and extract werewolf threat, was updated. New directive. Identify and document the unknown entity. Do not engage unless necessary. Do not engage. As if we had a choice. As if we were the ones deciding when contact would happen. Looking back, I realize how absurd that was. We were standing inside the hunting ground of something that had already killed multiple apex predators, and we were talking about it like it was a specimen to be cataloged. Like we had any control over the situation. We did not. We had not had control since the moment we stepped past the tree line. That night everything changed. The footsteps returned. But this time they did not come from behind us. They came from inside the perimeter. Inside the ring of motion sensors we had placed around the camp. The sensors never triggered. The cameras caught nothing, but we heard it. All 5 of us. Footsteps circling the camp in a slow, deliberate loop. Around and around for nearly an hour. Then they stopped. And in the silence that followed, a voice came from the darkness just beyond the tree line. It was Jensen's voice, and it said, "Do not engage." The exact words from our updated directive, words that had been transmitted over encrypted radio less than 4 hours earlier. It was listening to everything. The 4th night is when we started losing people. Jensen restructured the team. No one moves alone. Paired movement only. Constant visual contact. Weapons up at all times. We were no longer investigating. We were surviving. At 2200, Jensen and Davis took the North Patrol while Reeves, Carter, and I held the camp. The plan was a short loop. 2 kilometers out, 2 kilometers back. 90 minutes maximum. They made radio contact at the 30-minute mark. All clear. No activity. Just the silence in the dark. At the 60-minute mark, Jensen called in again. His voice was calm. Controlled. He reported movement ahead of them. Something large. He said they were adjusting their route to avoid contact. At the 75-minute mark, we heard Davis on the radio. His voice was different, tight, strained. He said Jensen had stopped responding. He said Jensen was standing in the middle of the trail, staring into the trees, and would not move. Carter told Davis to physically grab Jensen and return to camp immediately. Davis acknowledged. They never came back. At the 90-minute mark, we sent a radio call. No response. We tried again at 100 minutes, at 110, at 120. Nothing but silence on every frequency. Reeves wanted to go after them. Carter told him no. I agreed with Carter. Whatever had taken them wanted us to follow. It was the oldest trick in any predator's playbook. Separate the group, lure the rest. We held position until dawn. When the sun came up, Reeves and I followed their trail while Carter maintained the camp. The trail was clean for the first kilometer. Boot prints in the soft soil. Standard patrol pace. Then the print stopped. Not faded. Not obscured. Stopped. Mid-stride. As if both men had simply ceased to exist between one step and the next. The forest floor ahead was untouched. No drag marks. No struggle. No blood. No indication that two armed men had been taken from this spot against their will. Reeves searched the area for an hour. He found one thing. Jensen's radio placed upright on a flat stone beside the trail. Placed. Not dropped. Not thrown. Placed there with intention, the antenna pointing straight up, as if whoever left it wanted us to find it. When Carter tried to power it on, it played back a recording. Except it was not a recording from our communications. It was Jensen's voice saying words he had spoken around the campfire the first night. A private conversation about his daughter. About how she had just started school. About how he promised her he would be home by Friday. Nobody recorded that conversation. There was no equipment running. No microphone. No device. Something had listened, remembered every word, and played it back through his own radio. Not as communication. As demonstration. It wanted us to know what it could do. That afternoon, we heard Davis's voice calling from the south side of the camp. Clear as day. Calling for help. Saying he was injured. Saying he could see the tents. Carter almost went. He actually stood up and took 2 steps toward the voice before Reeves grabbed his arm and held him in place. We looked south. There was nothing there. No movement. No figure. Just the trees and the voice of a man who was already gone, echoing through the forest like a recording on a loop. It played that voice for 3 hours. Sometimes pleading. Sometimes calm. Sometimes laughing. It ran through the full range of Davis's vocal patterns like it was practicing. Learning the nuances. Perfecting the imitation. By nightfall on the 4th day we were 3. And we all understood the same thing without saying it. This creature was not just intelligent. It was adaptive. It learned from every encounter. It studied our reactions, our communications, our emotions. Each time it made contact, it was more precise, more convincing, more human. It had started by mimicking words. Now it was mimicking feelings. And each iteration was closer to perfect than the last. I wrote in my field notes that night a single sentence that I still think about every day. It is not hunting us the way a predator hunts prey. It is hunting us the way a scientist runs an experiment. Testing variables, observing outcomes, adjusting methods. And we were the test subjects. On the 5th day I found the chamber. I do not know what else to call it. It was not a cave. It was not a structure. It was a space beneath the forest floor, concealed under a root system so dense and tangled that it looked natural. Like the earth had simply grown over it. Reeves found the entrance by accident. His foot went through what looked like solid ground, and beneath the surface was a hollow. Deep, descending into darkness. We should not have gone in. I know that now. But at that point, we were looking for Jensen and Davis. We were looking for anything that might explain what we were dealing with. And the opening was large enough to suggest something used it regularly. We descended about 4 meters into a space that opened into a wide, flat chamber. The walls were earth and root, packed hard and smooth. The air was cold and carried that same metallic chemical smell from the first carcass. Carter turned on his flashlight and swept the room. What we saw in that light is something I will carry until the day I die. Along the walls, arranged in rows, were remains. Not piles, not scattered. Organized by type. Animal bones in one section. Werewolf remains in another. And in the farthest corner, human remains. Partial skeletons. Tissue samples preserved in a substance I could not identify, thick and amber-colored, almost like resin. clothing folded and stacked, personal items sorted by material, metal in one group, organic in another, synthetic in a third. It was a collection, a catalog, a library of biological material organized with a precision that spoke to a mind far more methodical than anything I had ever encountered. But the worst part was the wall directly opposite the entrance. Carved into the packed earth, in shallow but unmistakable lines, were diagrams. Anatomical diagrams, skeletal structures of animals, werewolves, and humans, drawn with an accuracy that would rival a medical textbook. Organ placement, circulatory systems, all rendered in exacting detail. Beside the human diagrams, there were notations, not in any language I recognized. Dense clusters of marks that repeated in patterns, not random, structured, like a written system. This creature had not just been killing, it had been documenting, recording its findings, building an understanding of every living thing in its territory from the inside out. Carter backed toward the entrance. His breathing was fast and shallow. He said one word, and he was right. That is exactly what we were. Not intruders, not threats, not prey. Specimens delivered to its doorstep by an organization that thought it was sending us to deal with werewolves. 14 disappearances over 18 months. 14 subjects, each one observed, captured, studied, and cataloged. And now 3 more had walked in willingly, carrying advanced equipment and demonstrating coordinated group behavior that this thing had never had the opportunity to study before. We were not a threat to it. We were an upgrade, a more complex sample, a new variable in an experiment that had been running long before we arrived and would continue long after we were gone. Reeves grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the entrance. We climbed out of that chamber in silence and moved back toward camp at a pace just short of running. I did not look back, because in the last second before I turned away from that wall of diagrams, I noticed something that made my blood go cold. The most recent human diagram was not finished. The skeletal outline was complete. The musculature was partially drawn, but the internal organs were blank, waiting. It was not done with us yet. I am not going to describe how we got out, partly because the details are classified, partly because I do not fully remember. The extraction was chaos. Carter did not make it. Reeves and I reached the forest edge at dawn on the 6th day, dehydrated, injured, and broken in ways that do not show on the body. We were debriefed for 11 days, separately, in windowless rooms with people who asked the same questions over and over and wrote down answers they clearly did not believe. The official report listed the mission as a partial success. Werewolf presence confirmed. 2 operatives lost in action. Hostile wildlife encounter. Hostile wildlife, that is what they called it. Reeves was reassigned within a month. I was given medical leave and told to rest, to recover, to let it go. And for a while I tried. I returned to my apartment. I ate meals and watched television and went through the motions of a life that felt like a costume I was wearing over something broken. The nightmares were constant, but nightmares I could handle. I had dealt with those before. What I could not handle was what started happening 6 weeks after I came home. It was small at first. A sound in the hallway outside my apartment at 3 in the morning. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingertips on wood. I checked the hallway. Then the clicking started. The same clicking Anna Harlow described in her last radio transmission. Coming from above. I heard it in my ceiling at night. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Like something testing the material. Learning what it was made of. I installed cameras, motion sensors, recording equipment. Nothing ever triggered. Nothing was ever captured. But I heard it. Every night. Getting closer. 3 months after the mission, I was lying in bed at 2 in the morning when I heard a voice outside my bedroom door. It was Carter's voice, the man who did not make it out of the forest, and he was saying my name over and over, calm and patient, like he had all the time in the world. I did not open the door. The voice stopped after an hour, and in the silence that followed, I heard something I have never told anyone until now. Breathing, slow and measured, coming from inside the wall behind my bed. I have moved 4 times since. It does not matter. The sounds follow. The voice follows. The clicking follows. I do not believe I escaped. I believe I was released. Let go on purpose so it could observe something new. How a subject behaves after exposure. how fear develops over time, how a human mind deteriorates when it knows it is being watched and cannot prove it. I am still part of the experiment. I never stopped being part of it. And every night, when the house goes quiet and the darkness settles in, I hear it. That clicking in the wall, that voice that should not exist, that slow, patient breathing of something that followed me out of the forest and has no intention of leaving. It knows I survived, and I think it is almost done watching. If you have ever been in a place that felt wrong, a place where the silence was too heavy and the air tasted like metal, and your body told you to leave before your mind could explain why, trust that feeling, because something might be learning you. If this story kept you up, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me, would you have gone into those woods? What do you think the creature actually is? Let me know, and stay out of the dark.